Ghana, we now have freedom. Ghana, land of freedom. Toils of the brave and the sweat of their labors. Toils of the brave.
And so anyway, also behind our house on this little teeny dirt road was a mosque. And he would call people to prayer. And living there 3 weeks, I got used to the like early morning prayer, and I would hear him, and it was so pretty. And I would hear him, and I would know when he was going to be finished because I had heard it every night, so I knew when I could go back to sleep.
Did he use a loudspeaker?
No, they didn't have them in those days. And my father, my Ghanaian father, Morosanda, never spoke English to me once. I didn't even know he was fluent in English until I visited him long after. But he used to make me come to his living room, or in Ghana they call it a hall, at night. And all the people would come and visit him because he was a really important man in the village. And they would all speak Hausa. And they would look at me, and then look at each other and jabba, 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 and then look at me, look at each other, jabba, jabba, jabba. So I would stay there as long as I could stand it, and then I would leave. I used to love going to visit his wife's house because you had to go behind on these little pathways between the compounds, and I would go by a Muslim school where the little boys were sitting under a tree learning the Quran, and you would go by and you would hear them repeating it over and over as they memorized it. And then I went where the women lived, and the babies were there, and little babies didn't mind me, but toddlers screamed out of fear. So then we had to make our way to our towns and our schools and introduce ourselves to principals and house mistresses and stuff, open bank account, because they were going to pay us through our bank accounts and stuff. So I took a Mammy Lori to Bolga, found my school, introduced myself to my principal.
How long of a drive ride was it?
It was 57 miles, which took about an hour and a half. So she said to me, "Did you bring your Bible with you?" And I'm thinking, what? Why would she ask that question? So I said to her, "No, but I have parts of it memorized." I'm thinking she probably thought, "Oh my God, this is a wise ass." So I was going to live on one side of a duplex, brand new duplex, and my house had a living room or a hall, a bedroom, an extra room that they had a desk in, and an eat-in area. And outside was a courtyard, and there was another room off the courtyard, a kitchen with a stove and a gas cylinder, but I could never use it because you couldn't get gas in my town. A shower room, of course it was always cold water, and then a toilet. And I had a bed, and there were no closets, so you had a big cabinet for your clothes, and they had like a vanity that had a mirror. And in my living room I had 3 or 4 chairs and a table, and I later had them make a bookcase for me with, bricks and, the old college bookcase I had them make in that room. And my kitchen had a table and 3 chairs and a refrigerator that actually didn't come until after I was there a while. No, it was a regular size refrigerator. And so I was there a week.
How was it powered, your refrigerator?
You plugged it in.
Electricity?
The school had electricity. The town had electricity. Bolga was the upper regional capital, and even though it was a brand new regional capital, like only 5 years old, they were trying to do the best. It had a plant that, electricity went out periodically, but but usually it stayed pretty much. The school had no backup generators or anything, but we had electricity. And so I ended up always cooking on a little wood charcoal, looked like a round hibachi. So I went down in town, opened my account, and just kind of roamed the town, went into the market. And then from there, we had to make our way south to Koforidua by ourselves. And Koforidua was like, I'd say, 10 hours from where I was.
Why'd you have to go there?
Because that's where the next step for training was. So we went to Koforidua, and we all stayed in a secondary school together as a whole group, still taking language training.
You said make it down by yourself, so they said, okay, you've got to figure out how to get there.
Yeah, they just said, meet us, be in Koforidua on this date. So I had started with a language instructor called Muhammad Lowell he was called, and he was the nicest guy, but there were 3 people in my language group who drove me out of my mind because they were so slow to learn the language. And every day we went over what we learned the day before, and the day before that, and the day before that. So in Winneba, I had kind of stopped going to language because I couldn't stand it. I knew that I would probably beat up those 2, especially the 2 women. So in Baku, I learned a lot more of the language because I was speaking it all the time with my family. And we got to Koforidua, and lo and behold, they had hired a second language instructor for 3 of us that were the quickest 3. And it was like shooting ourselves in the foot, because Lowell, you could get off on topic and ask him questions, and he would chit-chat with you. And Bosco, my new instructor, asked him a question, he would say, after language. It was like, oh no. And he was really a taskmaster. And we spent a whole week all the 115 of us or whatever was left after those weeks, because some went home before the live-in, and we were losing people all the time during training. And it was so awful. I just hated training, and they kept telling us, get through it, you'll survive. And I can remember going into the room where all the women were sleeping in one giant room. And I can remember at one point saying, I really hate it here, I'm packing my bags and I'm going home. And about 5 of the other women that were there saying, wait, we're coming with you. So we just kind of laughed it off, and that was it. After the week, they divided us into 2 groups, training college and secondary school. And I moved down the road to training college when we were student teaching, and we were there for 3 weeks. And they had students that they had paid to come and be taught by us, and we were observed, and it was kind of interesting. I really enjoyed it. I learned, but I didn't learn to teach till I actually taught. But that was 3 weeks, and then our last week was at the University of Legon, and that was wonderful. We actually had coffee out of real cups, and they had dances, you know, Ghanaian dancers, and they had set up kente weavers for us to see, and we had our language tests.
They set up what for you?
Kente. Kente is a traditional Ghanaian cloth that's made by hand. And they have this loom that's like from here to all the way probably your bed. That's how long the loom is. And they had set that up there, and the only thing that we had that week that was really, besides the swearing in, was our language tests. So I went and took my Hausa test, you know, it was verbal language test, and Peace Corps director came to find me and Charlie, who was also one of the 3, and we had scored a 1+, and no one had ever scored that high in Ghana before, and they were totally amazed that both of us had scored so high. And of course it was because Bosco beat us if we didn't learn Hausa. And the other guy in the 3rd one in our group got a 1, which was really high also, because most people got a 0+, a few got 1s, but no one ever got a 1+. And Charlie and I roared laughing, because we knew that, you know, we had scars on our back from being flat, you know, being whipped by Bosco to learn our language. But Peace Corps was amazed that we had learned so much. And one of the reasons we did was I grabbed one of the guys in my language group and I said, come with me. And my language instructor, the northern Ghanaians were considered second-class citizens by the southern Ghanaians. And my language instructor had told us that if we find anyone doing a really dirty job in Accra or Kumasi, any of the big cities, if we spoke to them in Hausa, they would always answer because they were going to be from the north. And that in every village, every good-sized village or town in southern Ghana, there was a place called the Zongo. And the Zongo is where all the northerners lived together. So even in Winneba, I grabbed this guy Roger, who was in my group, and I made him come with me to town, and we found the Zongo. And we went in, and we introduced ourselves to the Zongo chief, and we learned some Hausa that way. So I said to him, you got to come, I'm not going alone. So he came with me, only because that was the first 2 weeks I was in country. So we were sworn in by the ambassador. We're all in this giant room. And we read what they wanted us to say, you know, like we wouldn't overthrow the government. And we're looking, saying, look, postage alone would kill us at the mere idea of overthrowing the government. And they said, if you don't sign this paper and then be sworn in, you won't get your 250 CDs that you get to furnish a house and get what you need. So we all said, okay, we're in this room. There was no celebration. Now they have giant celebrations. We just raised our right hand. We repeated after the ambassador, and we were Peace Corps volunteers. And then I had a list of what I needed for my house, like, you know, pots and pans and stuff like that. And I went.
Let me break in a minute. You did so fantastic with language, but you also said jokingly that you hated training, or what you hated?
Oh, training was awful.
Because
you're all herded together. The food was terrible. It was the first time any of us had ever been away from home for that length of time. The mail kind of didn't catch up with us as we moved around the country, so you didn't hear from home. And it was just depressing. And volunteers who were already in Ghana, the year before, they had trained half the time in Ghana and half the time in the United States. They said, training is the hardest part of your 2 years. And they all told us that, and they were right. It was depressing. It was just hot. As I said, the food, I mean, they served me this food that looked like they picked the leaves off a tree. And it was called contumere, and I never liked contumere. I wasn't going to eat leaves. And the food was horrible. You know, for breakfast you got coffee in a giant bread roll and some margarine. You know, and it's just, I liked living with the family, and I liked being in my own town, but being with a herd, you never, you know, and everyone felt the same way. As I said, those 5 women said, we'll go with you. Training was just not a fun thing to do.
Ghana, we now have freedom. Ghana, land of freedom, toils of the brave.